And now back to your regular programming.
If you speak better to yourself.
You showed up for probably the dumbest conversation we've ever had on this show.
Let's have that smile again.
Tell me how that happens. Physically should not happen.
Relax.
If you say
Give me as well.
3 times a day, God will line it up.
He's just an absolute hack, and he gets his ass kicked by the teammates every week. It's just terrible.
Championship weekend has lived up to the hype, and the college football playoff rankings are surely going to be an exciting reveal. We're going to break down all of the championship games, but before we get there, Sean, can you share with our listeners a quick word from BetOnline?
I'd love to. If you're done just placing minimal wagers throughout the season because there's so many games in college football and you want to start upping your unit size because we're not going to have as much of it anymore, go to BetOnline. If you're tired of the $5, you want to start putting down 40, then you can do that. Some people are having a
89?
good... Yeah, some people are having some good weekends so far. If you got a brain in your head or if you got a gut feeling, go to BetOnline, and they got the largest selection of odds on everything football, NBA, college basketball. Shout out to Rhodey, 9-0 so far this year in hoops. Bunch of hacks that we know are super excited for that. NHL, UFC, boxing. BetOnline has it all. Head to the website today to see why BetOnline is America's most trusted site for online wagering. BetOnline, the game starts here.
Sean, you can't convince me that Arizona State doesn't deserve to have the bye, the fourth final bye in the college football playoff over Boise State. Boise State won their game against UNLV, but let's lock in first on how the Big 12 championship game went. Arizona State, actually, you can't even say how it went. It ended pretty freaking quickly at the start of the second half. 45-19. Cam Scadaboo, who is the workhorse, said, "This is light work." 16 carries for 170 yards and 2 touchdowns. That doesn't even do the due diligence of describing his dominance because he had 140 yards rushing at halftime, and they stopped giving him the ball midway through the third quarter. One of the best running backs in the country. He is a ball of fury. But what we were displayed and were shown in this game, Sean, was that this Arizona State defense, it's full of ferocity, it's full of energy. They didn't allow this Iowa State offense to get anything going as they only mustered 214 yards passing, 127 yards rushing. I don't know how you can look at what Arizona State just did and how they finished this season. And albeit they've got one more loss than Boise State does, but they've got more Power 4 wins. Boise State has one game that they've ridden off of, and they beat UNLV the way that they did by not scoring in the second half. I stand by this. Give the dang P4 team the bye.
Yeah, Arizona State looked like they definitely earned it. If this was a closer matchup against a good, not great Iowa State team, maybe there's a little more room for debate. There's the Ginty factor. There's the possible Heisman factor. There's a lot of it. You could say Iowa State has been good this year. Fine. No one should take umbrage with that. No one should be calling their local radio stations if someone's saying Iowa State had a good year. But they were not a playoff team. We kind of knew going into this week that the Big 12 was shaping up to have it handed to Arizona State. I think they have one of the best, if not the best coach in the conference in Kenny Dillingham, who really made the most out of this year when, all right, we got a fine quarterback. We have a really good running back, and now we're just going to have to play some actual football, which is what Arizona State did very well down the stretch. Nothing incredibly flashy. Good touchdowns, incredible touchdowns by Guillory today. Those were fantastic grabs. But across the board, there's nothing about this Arizona State team, maybe outside of Scadaboo's physicality at the running back position, that's blowing you away, but they're playing really good ball, and they have a coach that understands. It's kind of like last year. I feel like Dillingham made a step where Lanning started making some big, bold decisions at Oregon, and you're like, okay, he's starting to feel the moment, and he's getting opportunistic. He's taking risks, but it always seems like he has a play. I love that from Arizona State. They seem more prepared, and they seem like a team that could at least make a little bit of noise and provide a challenge in the CFP.
By the way, not to correct you, but I believe it's Gilroy is the pronunciation there. Just want to make sure that we're accurate on that. But the way that they dominated, and it felt like it started to pull away for them in the second quarter, the way that they were able to separate as easily as they did on both sides of the football. They were generating pressures so quickly throughout this game. They were getting after Rocco Becht. They were generating a lot of tackles for loss. This says they didn't have any sacks, but that doesn't feel right. 4 tackles for loss in this game, but they were meeting a lot of Iowa State's running backs at the line of scrimmage. A lot of Iowa State's rushing production, comes a little bit later on in the game as this game started to separate. But that dominance that we're talking about here, if this game was close, maybe the debate could be had that Boise State deserves to remain where they are. But I just don't know how the committee can look at the results of the season, and more importantly, with a championship on the line for the conference, that Arizona State was this locked in and they were firing on all cylinders on every single snap. They were going full freaking speed and they were dominating on both sides of the football. I'm not trying to downplay the performance by Boise State this season and the way that they looked against UNLV last night. They had a pretty strong game and they were able to have the typical Ashton Denty highlights that we're used to seeing where he looks fantastic and the defense was able to get pressures. UNLV did not seem like they wanted to be there because of the weather and how freaking cold it was. But for this different level of ass kicking between the two performances and what I mentioned a second ago, Boise State doesn't have a Power 4 win. They don't have that Power 4 upset. This isn't like that Cincinnati team a few years ago that had a win over Indiana and a win over Notre Dame that justified them being placed in the playoff. Instead, we're riding off of a game from week 2 in which they played close against Oregon, a team that Oregon team that the week prior played really freaking close and could have possibly lost to Idaho, an FCS program, albeit a playoff one. We need to understand that at the beginning of the year, Boise State caught Oregon when they were still figuring things out. And I think if they faced off with one another again, it would go completely differently. I'm just going to finish this off by saying and restating what I've said like 5 times over again and said differently each time. Give Arizona State the damn bye.
They need the bye. They definitely do. And as a G5 apologist, as somebody who loves having a G5 representative in the CFP, especially if we're expanding it to 12 teams, it just makes sense to me. I like it. I will stand by it. But that doesn't just... I think the G5 and the CFP is smart enough to understand that's not how the game is played when we're putting together a 12-team playoff with all of these conferences and we're trying to get you incorporated. It's going to rub a lot of people the wrong way if a G5 team has a bye and a G5 team with the bye doesn't necessarily have a first-round quarterback to go with it. They don't have some crazy P4 wins on their resume to really validate it. So if we want to keep the harmony, right now, Boise can't be a team with a bye. They have to just be seeded 10 to 12. I don't care at that point. If they're in, that's cool. But you don't keep having the G5 team in the playoff if you just kick this expanded thing out and saying with a big undeserved bye game where all these other teams with the talents and the different level of competition don't have that and can't have that. And that puts the whole structure into question. Whereas in general, I do like the structure of the expanded playoff, but they just can't have it this year. It is not the right team to forego a P4 champion to have a top 4 seed.
All right, Sean, let's talk about the SEC Championship game. The theatrics were certainly there. Another wild overtime win for Georgia, 22-19. They're without Carson Beck for the entirety of the second half after he goes down with an apparent, elbow injury, the way that he was favoring his hand, comes in for a handoff on the final play, almost calling his shot, saying, hey, coach, put me in. We're going to win on this play. Etienne pushes his way through unimpacted by the Texas defense. Look, both these teams are getting into the college football playoff. Both are good enough to show up and to compete. My first takeaway from this, Sean, I think that this is lame on Texas's part, that all the expectations are out there for them to go into the SEC Championship game, win the football game, and then in the second half to go up against Georgia's backup quarterback who has extremely limited experience, and they could not get the job done. The most that they could do to rattle Gunnar Stockton was the one interception that they produced, but that was not enough to help them win this football game. Quinn Ewers especially does not play well with the 2 interceptions and a number of sacks that he took in this performance. I'm not buying stock in Texas in the playoff. I do not have faith in Texas that they're going to be a team that is going to go on a run. Could they win their first round game? Absolutely. But I do not feel that this is a squad that is built and equipped, especially because who is playing quarterback, they need to turn to Arch, that I can put any trust in them.
For as frustrating as the Georgia coaching has been this season and in this game, they outcoached Texas today, which should be pretty hard to do. Georgia, I don't think, has outcoached many teams. But tonight they outcoached Texas. They had a beat on them. Texas was unprepared for a lot of things. Let's look at the fake punt. Should have never happened. If you are a locked-in team that is ready to go win an SEC championship, you have all hands on deck ready for a fake punt at all times, because this is what we're playing for. You know, Georgia was playing for their playoff capabilities at that point with a quarterback down, their first stringer down, knowing if they lose, they could be on the chopping block. Just all the messy stuff like that, letting a second string quarterback walk you down and then have narratives start beginning about Gunnar Stockton, which are irresponsible. But for the most part, Texas just did not show up. It's what we've been talking about with Texas, where, yeah, maybe they could beat the bad teams by a good amount, but there hasn't been a lot of really strong football that they've shown this year. And I don't know how many game balls you're giving out for this team in this loss. I'd give out 2, one to Matthew Golden, one to DeAndre Moore Jr.
Right.
They had fantastic days. They carried the team. They made huge catches. If you bet on Georgia, it was 2-0 that were plaguing you for the 60 minutes. Everyone else, though, you're kind of relaxed watching Texas just wait to implode.
Defensively, they had a really good first half, but as attrition started to set in for this Georgia offense, they started to chip away. The big 48-yard rush by Trevor Etienne and then Nate Frazier had a number of big carries. What's disturbing, maybe that's a little bit strong of a word, but what's disturbing is this hope that Texas's defense is so good and they're statistically the most disruptive in the country that you would think as soon as Gunnar Stockton comes into the game, who's going to impact the game more as a runner than as a passer, and is also, as we mentioned a second ago, not experienced enough to be able to handle high-pressure situations like this. He played as well as he could have and did some really nice things. We'll talk about him in a second. But to allow 94 yards to Etienne and 47 to Nate Frazier, 141 total yards rushing, and then the final play being a rushing touchdown, that's where the problems come into play. That's where the concerns come into play, that this whole season, it was hype for Texas. The one game where they were challenged against Georgia in the regular season, they played like crap. And then here we are. It takes overtime, and then you can't even get it done in overtime to score. I don't trust this Texas team. I'm just gonna keep reiterating that. I know it's redundant, but I can't help but being super focused on how fraudulent it feels like they are.
Here's what Texas fans are going to have to come to grips with pretty quickly, and they can't be full-on sour grapes after this loss because it was to a backup quarterback. If I was a Texas fan, Carson Beck played the whole game, and this shook out exactly like it did, I'd say, okay, the ball didn't bounce our way. We forced 4 fumbles on defense, recovered 1, and the ball bounced to Georgia. They were able to recover it that way. They earned their opportunities, and they just beat us. But since it was to a backup quarterback, and since you had so many opportunities, and since your quarterback threw 2 really not good picks. The first one, tip drill, weird pick, he forced it. Second one, same issue, forced it on the sideline. I get it, 3rd and long, that happens. Quinn Ewers isn't the first quarterback, especially in college, to try to force a 3rd and 10 plus and throw it to a defender. It happens. It's what quarterbacks do, but you can't stand on your pedestal and say that one was taken for us. All you could do is sit and stew and just understand that you lost this game. You lost it in every single facet, and you're going to have to come to grips with likely a not college football national championship coming to your doorstep in January.
Credit to Glenn Schumann for basically saying, you know what, Quinn Ewers, if you're so freaking good, come out here and beat us. 46 passing attempts for him. Only allowed 51 rushing yards to Trey Wisner. Total only gave up 31 rushing yards, so that's not sack adjusted. Negative 27 rushing yards for Quinn Ewers, so he found no lanes to escape. He was playing with the apparent bum ankle, so we don't know the total severity of that. This defense for Georgia is 1,000% good enough to carry them through the playoff. The quarterback situation is so complicated though right now. It seems like what happened with Carson Beck is serious enough that it's going to limit his ability to just grip and throw the football. He came onto the field for that final play, and his hand almost looked like it was just like awkwardly open to the point where he wasn't.
He had a Lego hand. Where
yeah. It looked like he had a Lego hand going on. They had alluded to, Herb Street had alluded to this looking like a Brock Purdy UCL type injury where he was hit in the way that he was favoring and just the way that he was operating and moving. If that's the case and he's unavailable, I don't know how much I want to trust Gunnar Stockton. I got to give him 100% credit, though, for just finishing this game and making plays as a runner and being an athlete. I would imagine that the game plan for Mike Bobo is going to be really different than with Carson Beck. Is this a crazy shout to say that it felt like the offense had like a tiny bit of a different level of juice when he was in there because he could maybe be a good athlete and just run around?
Maybe it was because we weren't looking at the giraffe standing back there throwing the ball.
I'm gonna bring that up.
Well, he's just very tall,
okay.
But they were still dialing up.
You were calling him ugly. He's only 6'4".
They were still dialing up plenty of throws right to the flat and plenty of screen passes, just like Mike Bobo likes to do, which is excruciating, which I absolutely loathe. But now you have backup quarterback time, and is backup quarterback time when you want to start really challenging deep? Maybe once or twice a game. Maybe in the next game they try it. But for the most part, it's going to look a lot like nickel and dime Georgia that we've grown accustomed to seeing this year.
All right, let's bounce over for my third outfit change of the day. The ACC Championship game played into the same level of ridiculousness. Clemson was up big. They came out swinging to start this game. Built a 14-0 lead. It looked like SMU had no life, no capability to hold up against this Clemson defensive line. But SMU clawed back in the second half. More importantly, Clemson shit their pants in the second half. They did not play anywhere near up to the same level of intensity as they did in the first half, which allowed for a lot of big splash plays and just chunks that enabled SMU to chip their way back in. Now creates a really complex circumstance for the committee tomorrow. What the heck is going to happen with this final spot in the playoff? Is Alabama out? Are they going to give it to SMU? Because in the first half, I would have told you, blown out SMU against Clemson, they're done. Why the heck would I put them in there? I am taking Alabama, and then Clemson claims that final auto bid into the field as the ACC champion. But 3 points losing to this team, it makes us moderately quality case, I guess. And we don't want to set that precedent of if you go to your conference championship game, you lose, that there is no point in actually playing the game.
I mean, making it to the conference championship game has to mean something, though. And if you're going to be an SMU, a previously 11-1 team, you drop to 11-2, you lose by 3 to Clemson in the championship game. How much are we weighing a loss when you make it there? You have to play an extra game. Whereas if they didn't have to play an extra game and were somehow seeded out, they wouldn't have any effect on if they were in the CFP unless we saw a drastic game in the championship that would effectively boot them if they had a bad enough year. But they earned their way to the ACC championship game. They were maybe the most consistent team in the conference. I'm not hating the idea of SMU making it, while I can completely understand any reasoning of why you would sub somebody in for them. It's really, really tricky because I look at this, I see the second half. Wow, they only played a good half, but Clemson only played a good half, and now Clemson's automatically in just because they won the game. A win's a win, and if wins don't matter, then what are we even doing? But I think SMU showed that they have the capability to compete with a team that is going to be in it.
Well, the problem is it's a lot of both of these teams holding themselves up by that talking point of, well, they played so close with the team that won the ACC and is going on to the college football playoff. But then if we take a step back and we look back at it, I'd argue neither of these teams is really worthy of being in the playoff field. I think both have flaws. I don't think SMU is built enough physically on their offensive line. Their defensive line, I think, is good enough. They were generating pressures. They were stopping the run for Clemson against Clemson. I do not think that their offensive line will do anything competitive against any of these really stout defensive lines that are on most of these playoff teams, they're going to get worked. They're going to get ran over. Clemson's defensive line is good, but it is 3/4 of the way towards the level of talent of some teams like Georgia, Tennessee, Notre Dame, Penn State, Oregon. It's going to be a messy game. That's where I get really conflicted. I'm saying this almost as I don't have an answer. I legitimately don't feel like that there is a correct answer on who belongs in here. I would argue that Alabama, despite having one more loss and not playing in their conference championship game, was competitive in matchups against teams that are in the playoff field, multiple matchups. That stems into or flows into the debate of SMU had to go to the ACC Championship game to prove their relevance, and they couldn't win their toughest matchup of the season. So what are we hanging on to? That's where I would sit.
I gotcha, but I'm going to go into the direction of the conferences and how many each is representing. I don't think that the SEC Championship slop fest that we saw tonight was really a good beckoning call for people to say, oh, look how strong the SEC is. Look how strong Alabama is.
Is it slop fest or defensive battle?
I would wager closer to slop fest, even though there was good defense. There was some good defense, but at the same time,
threw for 340 yards, and then there were just some really good defensive plays.
He threw 2 picks. He was bad tonight, and anybody this past week that was championing him in any sort of fashion,
yeah, you should be.
You should be directly canceled. Is what? We should target them.
Canceled. We should kill that person.
They should be doxed. I'll be wearing that one this week. But for the most part, I'm fine with it. I would actually, from today, I'd rather see the loser of the ACC game, SMU, make it than the loser from the Big 12 game. If we're looking at for conference representation, I'm fine with only one from the Big 12 getting in.
Wait, hold on a second. Well, that wasn't. I know it. I'm not correcting you, but that's not even on the table.
Yes,
so let's not even bring that up.
But for the strength of the ACC, this was a better SMU team than what we saw in the championship game of that Big 12 matchup, which was a definitive blowout. There was no questions. And how the conference ended up shaking out. Arizona State was likely now proven to be the one true Big 12 team that should have made it.
And this is something that I'm sure people will hate that I'm going to say out loud. The biggest problem is the best ACC team did not even play today. That's the real problem.
I agree.
Miami actually would have shown up and put up a roller coaster of an entertaining football game against whoever they played against. And anyone who wants to disagree with me, the Florida game, which is this up and coming team that looks so good, they went into the SEC in rival territory and they smoked them. I get it was week 1, but they have put up a lot of great performances. I just don't get that same level of dominance, that feel of dominance from SMU or Clemson. So that's why I'm just kind of I could do it without either of them. So if there's a way to get rid of one of them,
neither of them have
better off.
Neither of them have the quarterback, but the quarterbacks for both of these teams make Cam Ward. Cam Ward's actually better than the combined Cade Klubnik and Kevin Jennings, but mobility, arm dominance, which I saw some from Cade Klubnik tonight when he actually let it rip. I really liked that, but I think I feel that way, my way about Miami and how I agree they are the best team in the ACC is because they do have that dude that, if Clemson started lacking in the second half versus Miami doesn't lose this game.
Well, I would argue, though, it has nothing to do with me for quarterback play. And obviously Cam Ward is tremendous. That's not an angle at Cam Ward. It's me saying that, Kevin Jennings and Cade Klubnik played great football. They're the 2 best players on both these teams. The issues for those teams, why I don't think that they're going to be competitive at all in the playoff, and why I think they're going to get beat in both of their opening matchups, I don't think either team has the receivers. I don't think either team has the offensive line quality, and also neither team could consistently establish the run, nor have the bodies to really impose their will. I don't think that SMU can get into a battle with a team that if they did build a lead, that they could slow the game down and run the football. They're just not built to do that. And then inversely, if Clemson had to get into a shootout, they're not going to march the ball down the field quickly enough. Every team in the playoff field is heads above more talented than them.
I would say I wouldn't want to see, if I was a Clemson or SMU fan, I wouldn't want them to play one of the big 3 Big 10 teams, or maybe 2 of the SEC teams.
Yeah.
Everyone else, though, is fair play in my opinion.
Okay.
After that first 5, 6, Everyone else meets in the same middle for me, where you've had really good points this season. Somehow you earned your way here, but you're not in the top 4 for a reason. And you're not sitting at 5, first one out, for a reason. So I think there's actually going to be more competitiveness in the CFP than expected, just because Clemson has 3 losses and SMU is SMU.
Lastly, Oregon asserts their dominance with a late pick to seal the game, 45-37 win over Penn State. Now, this game was a heart attack for certain bettors who put money on the game because they were building a almost insurmountable lead. They were separating. Oregon was really flexing their muscles on offense, on defense. They were getting the stops. They were getting the splash plays. Tez Johnson was open over and over again. And then Penn State started to chip away. One of the things that I brought up on all the radio spots that I did and on Rufino and Joe was that it's deceptive. Oregon's D-line's good, but it's deceptive how weak they can be against teams that run the football really well. They're not one of the worst teams, but they're in the bottom half of the country in EPA per rush allowed. So we saw that today where Katron Allen goes for $124. And we also saw in the game that Nick Singleton was able to have a relative impact as well. And Drew Allar was able to have an impact as a rusher, as he had 54 yards and Singleton had 105, giving up 292 yards rushing. Now, I think the easy takeaway to have here, Sean, is that Oregon, tough opponent, closes the damn thing out, plays their ass off, great finish, game done. They're the best team in the country. They should be considered to be the favorite to win the national championship. But I would lengthen that to say we should be a hair worried if they go up against a team that can run the ball similarly to the way that Penn State did.
It should be the main concern for Oregon. I will say this. I have been waiting all year to say this. This is the best game that Penn State's played, and it's unfortunate it came in a loss. I was ready after the first quarter to come in here and rip James Franklin and rip the team and say it's the same old Penn State. This was a different team tonight. Very, very good. The running attack, Allen and Singleton just put it all on the line. They were spectacular. Aller, okay, I have my issues with him, but he was fine in this game. I don't think he was a total detriment. But Oregon is just, they're cut from a different cloth this year. Every receiver, they had six players catch passes. 2 of them were running backs. Excluding them, the 4 receivers that they had on their team didn't average under 10 yards a catch in this game. They just dice you up after the yard markers. It is insane. Their plays either go a yard, they lose a yard, or they get 12 yards. And what a nightmare it is to play Oregon. It has to be. Knowing that their route concepts are so crisp, Dylan Gabriel, it looks like this is his system. If I'm an NFL team and I am in a complete reset rebuild, I'm stealing this Oregon system. I'm stealing Dylan Gabriel, and I'm finding as many 175-pound wide receivers as I can, and I'm going to try to recreate.
I don't think. Okay, the quick pause on that for a second.
Sure.
We need to take a 2 to 3 week break of you pitching how to rebuild teams after the whole Quinn Ewers thing.
Offense.
Your new pitch is, let's take a miniature quarterback who's a below-average athlete and has a below-average arm to throw to receivers that are outliers physically and probably won't translate to the NFL.
He had 10 incompletions and 4 touchdowns today against a very good Penn State defense. I liked what I saw from him. I genuinely think this type of offense is the only one he thrives in, where he can take a deep drop and then pick apart a soft zone. That's what he's doing.
I think that you have the bones of a good thought, but here, let me
bring up the fight again. Go ahead.
No. Let me translate what you're trying to say. Will Stein is the best offensive coordinator in the country, and him calling these plays going into the playoff is going to be such a huge asset for them. So even if they do step into these matchups going up against a team, say they had to play Tennessee's a team that runs the ball really well, Notre Dame's a team that runs the ball really well, Indiana's a team that runs the ball really well. If they had to go up against those teams that could generate those big splash plays with a Jeremiah Love or a Dylan Sampson or a Tyson Lawton, they are just so explosive, and Will Stein is so great at generating those big plays to recapture momentum. That's what still makes them dangerous, and I think Oregon fans don't necessarily need to be super worried.
They're top to bottom. I know you have ill will towards Dylan Gabriel. We'll
I have ill will towards undersized quarterbacks because I'm a realist. I guess that makes me a hater for thinking that we're talking college ball.
I didn't call you a hater.
The short guy, he's shorter than me.
Oh, I'd love to get you
5'9".
back to back.
He's 5'9".
What are you?
I'm not 5'9".
I'm not trying to.
I'm 5'11". Quit being a dickhead.
I just asked a question. 5'11".
Quit being a dickhead.
Interesting. But look, Oregon, this was a massive win for them. The Big Ten has been impressive this year. Even if they didn't add USC, if they didn't add Oregon, they didn't add Washington, I'd still think, wow, maybe the Big Ten has two of the top teams in the nation. Adding them and then having Oregon sweep through this undefeated, it's not a miracle, but it is just an absolute dominant season that they've had. It's spectacular. They should be the clear number one. They were the clear number one when they beat Ohio State. I'm glad that they didn't have any weirdness, any drops. It's nice to have a number one that I think everyone's pretty confident in, and we can let the rest sort itself out.
Well, it will certainly sort itself out. It's late. I can't wait to see what these rankings are going to be for the college football playoff. We'll be back later on this week. We've got NFL, we've got bets, we've got so much drama to unpack in this month of December. At Joe DeLeone, at Sanderson Radio. We'll talk to you folks later. Enjoy the rest of your week.